Minimalists.
About your transition out of the corporate world, what was that decision like for you? And I think back to when I started as a freelancer, and it sounds similar to you guys, where you say you had 50 followers come to your site, 50 people come to your site to read what you had to say.
Right.
I had a $100 project every once in a while, every 2 weeks. Not enough, right? 50 people is likely not enough.
No.
If you're trying to spread your message and make a sustainable living.
To make it to have people to support you.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, again, we never had a number in our heads on like how many people. In fact, if you were to ask me now, like, so what's the number to have a sustainable audience that can support you on a consistent basis? Like, I wouldn't even be able to tell you.
And it's probably different for everyone, because for some people at 50, if you're a really well-known artist and you have 50 really good buyers, you might be a multimillionaire.
Right. Yeah. Very true.
Or if Kevin Kelly says 1,000 true fans or whatever. I think, Ryan, early on, you and I, we weren't. It wasn't a business though. Like it legitimately wasn't a business. Like we had a domain, but we didn't have the LLC or any hopes to have like a team of people that we work with, and that's why Ryan earlier was talking about Sean. Like, is our employee? Like, we don't think of people in those terms. Like, we're all on the same team, right? And I think that early on it was just like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, some people are getting something from this, and then we learned like, hey, maybe we can make some money.
Yeah, well, we didn't. I mean, we didn't charge for anything on our website for the first year that we had it. I mean, it was just us putting up our essays, and it wasn't until people kept asking, when are you going to come out with your book? And I'm like, well, yeah, that makes sense. And Josh is like, yeah, we're the Minimalists. We should write a book on minimalism. So, I mean, that was really the first thing we charged for. That book we wrote I think it came out December 2011. Is that correct?
Yeah.
The best sales month that it ever had, it was December 2012. 13. Sorry. So it was 2 years later.
Yeah.
And so, just to the point of like, there is no magic recipe, I guess.
How do you approach risk? Because it seems to me that that's a huge risk. You have these jobs where you're comfortable, where you're making a lot of money, and
back to the transition question. Yeah.
So how do you deal with that risk?
When I sat Josh down and asked him, why the hell are you so happy? And he told me about this thing called minimalism and introduced me to an entire community of people who were minimalists. What I saw was some very common sense things. Like, if I don't have a 6-figure mortgage hanging over my head, if I don't buy a new car every couple of years, if I stop racking up all this credit card debt, maybe I won't have to work 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week. So for me, minimalism, the why behind it was, why did I want to become a minimalist? When I asked myself that question, how might my life be better with less? Like, the one thing that really stood out to me was my time. I could reclaim some of my time. So minimalism, I wasn't like diving into it to be this, I'm going to live in a box I'm going to be a freegan, and I'm going to go live in a box and, live with as little money as possible. I mean, it wasn't about doing it for the sake of, look at me, look how, altruistic I am. Like, here I am giving up everything. It was more about, hey, look, here is what I have on my plate now. And if I could find a way to give this up, then I can reclaim some of my time and maybe start on a better path. So it took me about a year and a half of paying off debt, of budgeting, eating ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which I really wish I would have done something different back then. It's not the healthiest diet, but it was cheap.
Better than carrot juice.
Better than carrot juice.
Guys, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a big fad now. The carrot juice is going to take over, yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't just quit our jobs and start a blog. That's the worst advice anyone can give you. It was a very slow transition. In fact, I got laid off. It wasn't even like I didn't really have the choice to be like, okay, now I have all my ducks in a row. I'm going to go ahead and quit now. I'm actually grateful I got laid off, because I don't know if I ever would have got to that point where I would have actually walked away. I mean, probably would have, but it would have been much later than when I got laid off in September 2012. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's about calculated risk. So everybody should take risks, and you're going to have to take risks in life if you're going to do anything worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's anything wrong with risk as long as you're making, like you said, a calculated risk. So when I got laid off, thank God that I had been going down this minimalist path, because at that point I did have 6 months worth of bills saved up. I had paid off a lot of my debt. I got rid of my car payment. I had prepared, because eventually the plan was to quit.
You moved out of your big house and rented it out to someone because you couldn't sell it.
Exactly. So when I got laid off, I mean, I guess that wasn't really taking a risk because I got laid off.
Risk is what you can stomach, though, right? It's like everybody has a different threshold of what they can stomach.
I will tell you though that like the month before I got laid off, I went to my boss and because I had got to a point where I felt like, okay, if I lost my job tomorrow, I can survive for at least the next 6 months and try and figure out some things to do. So I went to my boss the month before I got laid off, and I asked him, like, hey man, if I ever decide to leave, who would you fill my role with? Who would you replace me with? And we were talking, and eventually he's like, you know what, man? He's like, this program is working really well. I don't know if I would replace you. And I'm like, that's a really interesting thought, isn't it? And then a month later, I get the text of, hey Ryan, meet me in this conference room where we've laid off dozens of people before. So, I mean, when I got the text, I knew what was coming. But yeah, I mean, they basically hired me to build a program in the company. I did that. It was running well. They didn't need my role anymore. But I would not have had that conversation with him if I hadn't been working a plan for the last year and a half. So I think that's where risk is okay to take. Like, as long as you have a plan behind it and it is a bit calculated, what I've learned in my life is that I'm never going to just fall completely flat on my face as long as I do the pre-work before taking that risk.
I think some risks are really dangerous. The problem is we think most things that are risks, we treat most things like, oh my God, my 401k slipped by 0.1% this month. Like, we have the same reaction to that. Oh my God, like, so as we do, last night we saw a coyote walking around. Like, that is a much bigger risk to me than my 401k. If that thing is rabid and decides to attack me, I have to trip Bex and run faster than her.
Thank God Bex loves karate.
Coyote karate.
Coyote karate.
No, I think that that's the problem with risk, is we're often treating it like if something is dangerous. For me, it was riskier to stay because I saw what the outcome was. When those guys I aspired to be like, that's real risk. That going down that route, being fat, overweight, and just unhealthy in general, but also being unhappy. That's pretty risky too. Being dissatisfied with the life you're living, like, how long are you gonna do that before you start to look back and regret the life that you lived? And I could see that right then. Like, I don't regret spending all that time in my 20s learning what I learned, and I learned a whole lot that I was able to tweeze out and pull forward. But I know if I would have continued down that path much longer, I wouldn't have been living the life that I wanted to live. And it's not a perfect life. I still feel stress and anxiety, and there are times where it's really difficult. In fact, there are times it's so difficult where I'm like, man, it'd be easier to just go back and work for someone. I don't have to make all the damn decisions. And the truth is that when you look at the aggregate, it's so much better, and it's actually less risky now than what it was before. And by the way, like, staying with where I was ultimately would have been the biggest risk, because they were acquired by another company, by a larger telecom company that ate them up, and then very likely I would have been gone in that transition back in 2014 or whatever. And then if I wouldn't have prepared for it, I would have been scrambling to try to find a similar telecom job in Providence, Rhode Island or something, like just trying to like find whatever I can get to pay the bills. because I was still attached to that lifestyle. Man, that's a real risk.
It seems like the smartest thing that you can do is to develop and learn skills that aren't going out of style anytime soon. So if you develop becoming a better writer, or if you learn how to become a filmmaker or a photographer, these are all things that aren't going to go away very soon.
Right.
And it's something that if you can build something on your own and learn how to pick up some freelance jobs, even if the economy is doing bad, even if there aren't many jobs, you can probably still pick up some work.
When you press record for the first time on a camera, it's not you're like, well, I'm getting paid to do this. It had to do with something you were interested in, something that maybe aligned with what you wanted to do in the future, but it wasn't about money first. And I think a lot of these things for them to work out well for us long term is you want to be able to do it even if it's not sustainable monetarily. But then you can also look to see, does anyone make money doing this? Is there anyone who makes money as a filmmaker? Is there anyone who makes money as a writer? And the answer is, of course, yes. And I mean, you can find someone who is, a clown who, literally dresses up like clowns and makes money. If that's what you're passionate about, then great. If you're passionate about teaching horseback riding, you can find a way to make a living from that, from that passion, or at least somewhere that's adjacent to that passion. For me, what was I wrote fiction. That was the thing I always wanted to do, and now I write a lot less fiction because we had this whole beautiful nonfiction route. It was adjacent to what I was already doing, and for you, you started out, you were doing wedding videography.
Bar mitzvah. I was just looking at some of the old bar mitzvah intro videos I made.
I saw that with the bat on fire.
Wasn't that incredible?
That's awesome.
I'm but you know what? Actually, I learned and relearned about how I approached those projects back in the day. Is that was a bar mitzvah video. There weren't high expectations, but I used it as an opportunity to practice color grading, to learn After Effects and how to track fire onto a baseball bat. I was like, holy cow! I probably learned a lot from that project. But you can't just say, this is just something that's temporary. I feel like any time you're developing your skill and your craft, you have to put yourself into it.
Yeah, I think we're all born with some sort of talents, but we often mistake those talents for skills. A skill is actually developed, and you have to spend time. So you might have a natural eye to see lighting or the way that you focus a camera, or the way that you are filming a particular scene. You might have a natural eye for that, but what makes it beautiful is the skill of figuring out how to do it most effectively. I think it's the same with anything else, any other creative endeavor, and not even creative endeavors. Like being in the business world, I learned how to run a business not by going to some class and reading about business theory, but by opening dozens of retail stores and managing hundreds of employees over many years. I messed up a lot. I had mentors of my own, but it was on-the-job training. It was much more effective than just going to a class and trying to sort of learn via osmosis, or you can't just read what's on your page here and then all of a sudden say, well, now I know how to direct a film. It doesn't work that way. And it's the same with writing a book. It's the same with pretty much any endeavor, creative or not.
Yeah, there are only so many entrepreneurial books you can read before you have to just put them down and actually try to start a business.
Yeah. And you can get some good sort of best practices from those, but you still have to implement that in your everyday life. Otherwise, it's useless.
Yeah, I think it's you get the guiding wisdom and good mentoring from that. So say if you don't have mentors in your life that can guide you in the right way and say, hey, it's not always about the bottom line.